Welcome everybody. I'm Eric. I'm the CEO of the Blockchain Supply Chain Association. On the line with us today, we have Si Chen from Open Source Strategies, going to discuss open source carbon accounting. Real quick about the association. Our association is pretty simple. It's about blockchain in your supply chain. And what more important than carbon accounting in today's conversations in our supply chains, right? We all need to make efforts. Supply chains account for a lot of carbon, right? Through transportation, through manufacturing. So how do you count all this? And this is why we invited the site to come talk to us about an open source solution that's available. We are recording. We will try to live stream if our technical difficulties leave us alone today. But Si, the floor is yours. And folks, if you have questions, please use the Q&A, raise your hands. Si, I don't know if you want to take questions as you move along or if you prefer to take them at the end.
Sure, we can definitely take questions as we go. And so feel free to ask on the chat and I'll try to address it as we go through here.
Perfect. So floor is yours, sir. Go right ahead, and we'll keep our questions for the progression of this, and have some interesting conversations at the end as well. So floor is yours.
Great. Okay. Hello, everybody. So my name is Si Chen. I'm from Open Source Strategies in Los Angeles. So just a little bit about how I got here. So about 20 years ago, I quit my job as a hedge fund manager to start a business with my wife. And we wanted to sell high-end home furnishings online. And everybody told us it was impossible because one, nobody's going to buy expensive products online. And two, you can't do it without venture capital funding. For a while, it seemed they might be right. I went from managing billions of dollars to wondering, exactly how do you sell something? But in the end, we did it. And the secret, I would say, was three things. One is the internet. That ability to have that global reach to both customers and suppliers was key. There was no way we could have done it without that. The second thing is we got really good at sourcing. I'm living proof that supply chain is important, okay? And the third thing that worked for us was open source software. The ability to have something that was free, that was customizable to build our business with was just indispensable. In fact, I liked open source software so much, I started a company to sell open source ERP and CRM software that we developed. That's what Open Source Strategy started out doing. So again, people told me this would be impossible because, come on, nobody's going to buy enterprise software without a big company standing behind it, right? And oh, by the way, did you not know that you can't build a software business without venture capital funding? And yet it worked because open source sells. And that's going to be something I'm going to share with you on the call today. So meanwhile, all this time, I've been kind of fascinated by climate as really an economics problem. It seemed to me that if climate change is happening, then there must be something wrong with all that economics I studied back at Wharton. So now looking at it all together with my experience in the supply chain with enterprise software and now with blockchain, I think that this is going to be a big, in fact, probably the biggest opportunity any of us will get to work on. And it's going to be something that plenty of people will tell you it's impossible, but I think it could be done with open source, with blockchain in the supply chain. And so let me show you how that could work. So in case you didn't know, carbon accounting is all of a sudden a hot field. And let me tell you, first of all, why. We're at the convergence of a lot of different trends right now that's driving interest in carbon accounting software and decarbonization, okay? You've got consumers. 70% or more of the people in the world believe that climate change is real. And they want to support companies who do something about it. So everywhere now, right? You get a salad, you get burritos at the Chipotle, you get a pair of sneakers from Albert's, you shop for a flight on Google, you start to see emissions calculations and companies' sustainability pledges and whatnot. because it's important, especially for the younger consumers in the world. Related to that is you have carbon markets starting up all over the world. There's already 50 jurisdictions covering 1 billion people worldwide, and more are coming all the time. Okay, the EU has had carbon markets for over a decade. The UK has them. China has introduced carbon cap and trade. California has it. There's regional greenhouse gas initiative covering many states in the United States and Canada. It exists in Australia and New Zealand. The state of Washington is introducing it. This is just happening all over the world, despite what you might be reading. The other thing that's been important is investors, okay? Some of the biggest fund managers in the world, BlackRock, which now manages over $9 trillion of assets. There's groups of net zero owners of finance, Climate 100 Plus, and they're pledging together with all the ESG funds. We're talking $50+ trillion of assets. They're saying, we want something done in the companies that we invest in about climate. And related to them is regulators all over the place. In the UK, EU, the SEC here in the United States are asking public companies for climate disclosures. And those will probably go to the other markets as well. And as part of this and just trying to stay ahead of the regulators, whatever combination you see, there's more and more companies joining this and saying, we're going to do something about climate. We're going to be net zero. Okay, you've got everybody from technology companies to IKEA to Nespresso to things that you might not have heard about. Big utilities in the United States, even oil and gas companies like Shell and BP saying, we are going to take the lead on climate. All of this requires, at its core, carbon accounting, okay? Knowing how much emissions are actually happening and decarbonization based on that carbon accounting. So in case it matters to you, venture capitalists are totally hot on this idea, but maybe for the wrong reasons. And I'll show you in a little bit why I think that. So why blockchain for carbon accounting? Why are we here? Carbon accounting is actually pretty easy, okay? It's just multiplication and addition. For everything that your business does, there's probably an emissions factor of how much CO2 emissions it contributed to. You use 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, there's an emissions factor that'll tell you, okay, you flew somebody across the United States on an airplane, there's another emission factor for that. In fact, we have that in our application. And I'll show you some screenshots of that. But what's really hard about carbon accounting is getting the data, okay? Getting the right data. This is from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is the standard for calculating carbon emissions for corporations. And what they're asking for here, I just took it verbatim from their document, is they want you to use supplier-specific emissions data for the products and the services that you're actually purchasing, rather than industry averages and model data. But they'll freely admit that it's costly and difficult to determine and verify the source and quality. It says it right there. Okay, this is hard already. But what makes it impossible, or almost impossible, is that you have to go through the whole supply chain to do this. Okay, you don't just get to measure the emissions from the fuel that you used or the electricity you purchased. That's scope 1 and 2. What you need to measure is scope 3. This is where most companies' emissions are. 60 to, in the case of, let's say, a natural gas utility, 90% of their emissions are from other things. It's from the things that you purchase from your suppliers. It's from the shipping of the goods to you, okay? It's from the shipping of your goods to your customers. It's from their use of your products. And it's from all the other things like travel and employee commuting and so on. And getting all this data requires going across industries, right, in your supply chain, going across countries because of our global supply chain. And it requires for big companies going into SMEs that may not report anything to anybody because they're too small to qualify for government reporting requirements, and yet you still need to get that data from them. So this is what has been the hardest part about carbon accounting.
Hey, Sai, sorry to cut you off there, but we have Anna raising a hand here. Maybe she has a question.
Yes, please.
Anna, unmute yourself and ask away. Anna? Or Carrie, those who also have Carrie. Oh, so continue. I think folks can't unmute. Let me work on that for you and we'll get back to those questions.
Okay, so this is a part that I wondered. Did those startups tell the VCs that their SaaS platforms are going to connect all the industries and all the countries of the world so that they're going to be the Google and Facebook of climate? Did they tell people that it's easy to integrate with their software because they offer APIs? Well, you're in enterprise software. You know the latter is just not true, right? But the other thing is SaaS is database driven. They put data in silos. They're market specific. Every SaaS solution you see out there is either targeted at SMEs or enterprise customers, their price, their feature sets, and they don't really cross over from one to the other. And this is why the blockchain is needed. Because the blockchain, the magical thing about blockchain is that it's global yet private. Think about that. All these transactions that happen with cryptocurrencies, everything on blockchains, they happen globally. Everybody can access them, and yet there's enough to give people privacy for their data. Blockchains are designed for collaboration. So whereas SaaS solutions, I think of them as the new EDI with all the fun that promises. The blockchain is really the new internet. So again, I think if Anna has a question.
Anna, how about you try unmuting yourself? You should be okay.
Or maybe it's better to just put your question in the chat. Yeah, just type it in the chat and I'll come to it.
You bet.
But meanwhile, we should just go over this very quickly because a lot of people still have these perceptions about blockchains that they waste energy and are just bad for the environment. Unfortunately, Bitcoin and Ethereum give us a bad name because they use proof of work algorithms that are really energy intensive. But a lot of other blockchains are not, and we've definitely spent time looking into this because this is important for what we do. People are also concerned blockchains cause speculation from cryptocurrency and NFT trading. But ultimately, blockchain is a technology. It supports technology of collaboration. And those are just use cases of it that maybe you don't like, but they're by no means the only thing you can do with it. And finally, I like this one. Blockchain is a solution looking for a problem. But whoever is still saying that is ignoring that blockchain is fundamentally changing industries, entertainment, gaming, supply chain, trade finance, and we believe climate as well. So I'd like to show you now what we've been building. And you're going to see 3 use cases. 2 of them based on my own personal experience and needs being an open source developer, and one of them that I knew absolutely nothing about. So every time I fly, I want to check that box that says offset my emissions, but I just can't do it, okay? Because where's my money going? What does planting trees mean? And how much good is that really doing? And I started thinking about a transparent alternative to all those airline offsets. The second thing is I do run my own e-commerce business. And again, there's climate neutral shipping out there, but how do I really know what they're doing? And how do I really get to do something about climate that matters to me and my customers? The third one's really interesting, oil and gas methane reduction. Now, this is actually something that I knew nothing about, but that's the great thing about open source, what you can learn from other people. And this came from Bertrand, whom I met in Hyperledger. He worked at the King Abdullah Petroleum Science and Research Center in Saudi Arabia. And we just started working on this, and I'll show you and tell you why it's important in a little bit. So the solution looks kind of like this at a high level. You get data coming in from web, from mobile, from ERP software, and they get routed to one or more auditors on the network. The auditors will review that data and issue emissions audits, which are NFT tokens of audited emissions. Those can then be used to create emission certificates, again, NFTs, of the products that you sell. That can be transferred to your customers. So your customers can start using the audited emissions from your products in their audits. And then those then in turn get transferred to their customers on and on down this chain. And this is exactly carbon accounting for the supply chain, through the supply chain that we're talking about with the blockchain. So quick question on the chat, the company called Flow Carbon. Yes, I have heard of Flow Carbon. If you're asking, I believe what they do is they're trying to work on the offset market. And that's a different thing actually than corporate carbon accounting, which is what we're talking about here. So if you have more questions, we can talk about offsets. And in fact, that's something I'll come back to at the end. So for example, you can go into this app and request an emissions audit for a flight that you took, attach a copy of your boarding pass or a ticket, and then submit it to the auditor like this. Similarly, you can request an audit for your electricity bill. Again, you upload a copy of your bill and you submit it. And we have emissions factors for that. And we have, using data from the UK government and the US EPA, emissions factors for a whole variety of things now. So burning of fuel, electricity, flights, shipping of goods, down to hotel travel, and so on and so forth. So the auditors, to answer Anna's question on the chat, are parties on the network who will review these requests and issue those certificates. So this is supposed to be quote unquote trusted parties. In a more advanced version, we could use a decentralized model, like these oracles where people have tokens and credits that they would stake on the audits. So they have something to keep them accountable to the results. And is the data available for South America? The data that we're currently using is from the UK government and the US EPA. So for South America, I would imagine just about every country publishes the emissions factors for its electricity grid as part of the clean development mechanism. So that data we could probably get. And then some of this data is general, like how much burning of, say, methane or natural gas emits. Some of it will be specific. And data is, in fact, a big challenge. Talk a little bit more about that. Do the auditors have to be certified? This is going to be based on how you want to use the network, right? If you're doing complex corporate scale emissions audits, yes, I believe the auditor should be certified. For a use case where we're verifying emissions from personal flights and travel, no, I don't think so. I mean, somebody just needs to verify that the ticket is for you and covers the trip that you talked about. So speaking of which, data could also come from your existing software system, like ERP or shipping systems. Here's an example of data coming in from UPS Quantum View on the right-hand side, using code to extract it. On the left-hand side, it could be in a generic JSON format. and it could just be fed into the system. So data could come in any form, and they go to the auditor like this, a page of pending emissions requests. Okay, and the auditor will review each request like this, and you see there's a location where they could get the content, which is encrypted with their public key. So they could download the content and decrypt it to review the request and either issue or decline an audit request. And once issued, the token looks like this. It has the total amount of emissions, it has what scope it is, and it has location of the documentation and the hash key to verify the documentation is the correct one. So this data could then is stored on the blockchain. And so a user could come in and search for example, their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So this is kind of a cool use case. This is the one with oil and gas methane reduction that I'm going to show you, that Bertrand told me about. So you might not have heard about this, but at every oil field, methane leaks out or is flared, meaning burnt, okay, because they're just underground and they need to come out to keep the operation going. And the climate impact of this, believe it or not, is equal to all the cars in the world. This is huge. And just now, the whole industry is coming around to really trying to address this. So in this example, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, there are different regions, different oil wells and producers. So we can audit the emissions for them, take the audited emissions for those areas, and then combine that with data about the products that they produce, oil and gas coming out of those oil fields, and then transfer that to their customers, which could be a natural gas utility that buys natural gas from different wells, so that they would know ultimately how much emissions footprint they have, and in that way incentivize buying from the better performing oil producers. And they could in turn use the same process to transfer this down to their customers, the buildings that use natural gas for heating, the trucks that use natural gas as fuel. So this is an example that we've worked on at Hyperledger for accounting for supply chain emissions in a very high emitting and important industry. Okay, so let's talk about some other opportunities. And if you came to this talk thinking, how could I make a business or make money off of an open source thing that's out there? I'm here to help you do just that. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So first thing, how do you take our open source software and make it a commercial offering? In addition to the usual stuff, you have, for example, UI and reporting, integration to people's ERP and software systems. You need two things. One is commercial data sets. We have gotten the data set from the UK government and US EPA, but if you're going to do commercial quality audits, you need to get more detailed data sets which are commercially available. The other thing that's really interesting is identity management, because on the blockchain, everything is pseudo-anonymous, right? People transact with crypto wallets. And in a real supply chain, people need to know who they're dealing with, who the counterparties are. So there will be a lot of cases where transactions are recorded on the blockchain, but someone else has to supply that identity layer. And around both open source and commercial products, there's just a lot of consulting opportunities for those of us who do that, from onboarding companies to calculating their emissions to just really analyzing their climate risks and helping companies manage their climate risks, to communicating with everybody from investors, customers, and regulators. So what I see with our open source project is actually a complete open source and commercial ecosystem. Okay, where the blockchain is open source. So everybody can interact with it, and it's a transaction fee-based model. And then around it will be SaaS vendors that do commercial offerings. There will be consultants who do specialized services. There will be big corporate users, small companies that access the blockchain directly if they're technically savvy or they work with a consultant. And finally, applications that individual users could use to access this. So the choice of the blockchain, this feeds into Linda's question about Hyperledger. Well, Hyperledger is a community. So I joined the Climate SIG, and it's been a really interesting experience to work with and meet other people in that. In terms of the actual blockchain technologies, there's really also a continuum, right? There's the public blockchains, like these ERC compatible blockchains. And then there's permission blockchains like Hyperledger, Fabric, and Besu. So there will be some cases where companies and industries will want to work off of a permission chain to transact their data. And there will be some cases where across industries and across many companies, there will be cases for public companies for a public blockchain. So it's really not a either or, but blockchain is really about bringing everybody and all these technologies together, in my point of view. Okay, and then a couple other tips. How do you sell climate accounting? Well, this is somebody else I met through the SIG, and his name is Hermano, and he's with a small fashion company in Italy. And he said that they filled out this voluntary survey. They were not required by anybody to do this for the Climate Disclosure Project. And after that, all sorts of companies reached out to them because they wanted to work with a company that had a climate strategy. Okay. Personal experience, we recently got a vendor onboarding survey from a major luxury goods company from France. And through all this basic standard information, they asked, what is your sustainability strategy? And what are you doing about climate change? So do you need to sell climate, or are people in fact already asking out there? And you just need to make sure that they ask you before they ask somebody else. And then how do you sell an open source thing? Okay, this is my secret. You go to a company and you tell them, here is free software that you can just get. And furthermore, it's better than free, okay? There's no vendor lock-in because you have all the access to the source code. So nobody could change the service and remove the features that you need. Nobody could come to you and say, we're increasing the price because whatever, we got bought out, we didn't raise a round of funding, and they can't force you to upgrade when you don't want to, and nobody has your data. And all you need to do, since you got it for free, is pay for the services as you need them. You can customize it as much as you need, or just use it out of the box. And you'll be amazed that people really respond to this because they're tired of what they see with SaaS vendors and with enterprise software, right? With exactly the stuff that I'm saying we do not do in open source. So this carbon tokens question, George, let me just address. We're not really a carbon token trading system, but rather an accounting system that includes carbon credits and offsets as well. So in the system, we would retire offsets, and then once they're retired, that would make them not be usable again by someone else. This is a standard feature of our system, but it's also a standard feature of all the systems for carbon offsets out there, okay? Every registry has a system that supports that feature. So double counting is this weird problem because it doesn't happen within anybody's system. What could happen is across different systems. Is there a system out there right now that you could check to make sure that an offset credit issued on one registry has not been issued on another registry somewhere? Given all the registries out there and their lack of data integration and transparency, no, there's simply no such system. It could happen. We have no idea whether and where it's happening or how often it's happening. So now let's talk a little bit about the industries that we could work on. First one is just consulting, something that we should know. What is your climate footprint? Chances are it's your office space, it's travel, and it's your computing. And what is the unit of your product or service? It's the hours that you bill. Simple as that, right? For an e-commerce business, it's our shipping expense, it's our cloud computing, and then it's some smaller amount of office space, probably by the value of sales. Now, what is the shipping industry's climate footprint? It's basically the sum of all their fuel and combustion, right? From diesel to gasoline to alternative transportation fuels, divided by the distance and weight shipped. And then the interesting one for fuel and energy, okay, it's the whole production process, right? From the extraction of fuel to the transportation of the fuel to refining, and then the leakage that happens in between, divided by the volume of fuel. The last one is very complex, lots of field devices, data, very high value projects for that industry. But these are some industries that if you already have exposure to, or you're already working with people on, then you can definitely start working on with. So what's ahead? Let me make some predictions. Easy one, okay, more disclosure requirements from regulators. It's the UK wants to be the first, the EU and the US are already following along. So China already has said that it will require climate disclosures, it just hasn't set a date. I could see within the next decade, all the major financial markets and exchanges requiring full scope 1, 2, and 3 climate disclosures. And where material, they're going to require supply and product specific emissions factors. The problem and the interesting opportunity also is that they're not going to be consistent, probably, just the way things are with the financial markets. The second thing is, and already seeing this again, with the biggest companies driving climate through their supply chains. Walmart, Apple, IKEA, Microsoft are already starting to do this in some way. They're saying, we're setting our climate targets. We want to be net zero by a certain day, or we want to reduce our emissions by a certain amount. And so that means we need to drive that through our supply chain. They absolutely have to do that because, again, majority of their emissions are in their supply chain. So they offer expertise, they offer workshops, they offer financing in some cases. And eventually, I think they'll come to cap and trade schemes in their own supply chain. So look for this to then cause all sorts of companies to start taking climate action. And finally, since there's a comment about federal government should do something, governments have been trying to do something about climate change for 30 years, okay? The Real Earth Summit happened in June of 1992. I don't know if where you were back in then. And look at where we are. And I see open source and blockchain as just another way to do something about climate. This is a slide from Andreessen Horowitz, and I think it applies to climate. And the difference between open source and governments is that we in open source, within these global grassroots communities, we're totally transparent and we've been able to affect change on a global scale. Can we do that through the blockchain, through DAOs, through collaborating with each other? And so this is my own project. Remember those airline emissions and offsets? I like to start a DAO where we record our own travel emissions, basically like a little open source project. We're then going to work on what are the right offsets, what are the right decarbonizations? Are those airlines we're flying really doing something about climate change, or is their sustainability report a lot of pretty pictures? And really apply open source principle to solve decarbonization, bring some quality to the offset market, and at the same time, create a business for the participants through monetizing our reputations. So it's kind of the end of my presentation. If you want to try it out, there's the link for the software, a link to our code, you can sign up, give me your email, or just connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you have ideas about what we can do, send me an email. But last but not least, any developers out there, if you want to do work on climate, you can work from anywhere, do it part-time, full-time, send me an email too. Okay, so answering some of the questions back here. So what GHG accounting standards are you going to adapt? It is basically the GHG protocol for corporate accounting and also for product accounting. So we're actually trying to bridge the two by calculating corporate emissions and then creating tokens for the specific products. And let's see. Does your approach still
have
require?
a couple of questions in the Q&A if you want to have a look, or I can read them out if you want.
Oh, I see it now. Okay. How far along is this open source platform? Okay. It is, as you see, it's working. We have a demo working on the Binance Smart Chain testnet platform, and we're looking to deploy it on the LiveNet. So it'll allow you to record emissions of your flights and travel and create an account and submit emissions audits for a company. So the screenshots that I showed you are working. So UI and options to present data to different audiences would not be interested in of one utility bill, but want to see the big emissions footprint by category. Yes, this UI issue is definitely there needs to be a lot more UI, right? So currently we've been more focused on just storing the data on the blockchain, but we would, for example, earlier I showed you there was a screen where you could filter your emissions by different scopes and types. Now, one of the things we've developed is synchronizing the blockchain data to a database. So from there, you can go to town and write all the BI intelligence reports that you like. Okay, so for carbon accounting auditors, need to be accredited to these standards. How will you get and vet accredited auditors? I think it's exactly the same as any kind of a carbon accounting software, right? If there are corporate users that want to do emissions accounting on that corporate scale, and they should be done by accredited auditors, then they or we could find the auditors and get them on the network and work with them. The system can work either way with corporate auditors, or eventually, I guess, just with decentralized or peer-to-peer networks of auditors. So I was just looking at one question here. Does your approach still require supplier input, or can you measure scope 3 emissions like steel production? Okay, this is supplier input. If you mean like the emissions from a supplier's production of steel, then that would still require some kind of an audit being done in the supplier, and they're sending you that information, potentially in the form of a product NFT. What we can help with is making that process easier than the traditional spreadsheet and paper approaches that's done. Also, there are standard commercial database factors of steel from different countries and what their emissions are. So it depends on what you're looking for there. So let's see. Do you use some kind of remote censoring data? This is in what I showed you. It doesn't specifically have to tie in to one or another. It can be any kind of data. So, right. So if we're just auditing emissions for a flight, it could be somebody's, flight ticket. But if you're saying, for example, at a oil and gas production facility, you have data, then that should be definitely in some way that's automated. And then what we could do, and what we've worked on before, is that data could go into Hyperledger Fabric, which is a permission data channel. So you could have, for example, the company, its auditors, and the data vendors, or one or more field data vendors providing the data in. And then that could issue tokens onto a network of the overall emissions and product-specific emissions. So those are some of the things that we could think of. So
Si, you could use satellite imagery, you could use IoT devices, you could use anything and bring that information automatically into the ledger, right?
Yes, that whole process can be automated. And Hyperledger Fabric, I believe, is actually a great ledger for that, because it's very high volume, and it could be shared with a group of people in a permission network. And to anybody who's asking, yes, that really is my email. I think I even spelled it correctly. So where we, in terms of this, is yes, this system is, as you can see, something that we're still developing. So there's a long way to go for us, but it's also usable. And so I'm going to start using it for my own travel emissions, and we're going to be looking to collectively vote on offsets and emissions reductions. And then I think we'll use it for our business, and hopefully we'll find other people in the open source community. But this is an open source project, so we're going to do it the open source way, I guess. Users being the developers and vice versa. Or carbon accountants in the same way you might have. Yeah, I mean, this question of who the auditors are, I think is pretty interesting, because I know a couple of people have been going back and forth on this. I'm not sure there's an accredited system, but also with the financial authorities, market authorities requiring audits of emissions, there's going to be serious requirements and liabilities from the disclosures that you make. So I think that will tighten up the process. And in some of the audits I've seen, they are just done by the regular financial auditors for companies as well.
And Dan was mentioning that in Canada, for example, where I sit, you do have some accredited auditors that do carbon emissions accounting. And I'm sure that, yeah, moving forward, a lot of countries, a lot of industries will be adding those auditors.
Yes. So a transaction will cost, on the Binance Smart Chain, it's not very much, about $1 or so. There's a even less expensive one, which is called Hedera Hashgraph, that we can integrate with, and it's very, very inexpensive to transact on that network. So most of the cost is going to be actually these auditors reviewing the document, or paying a decentralized, let's say, network with incentives to review and certify claims. So, any other questions? So what are the expectations of audit? Again, a question of the scale of the audit, right? For a flight ticket to audit your emissions, a couple bucks probably. For a large company that somebody would need to make disclosures for and review all sorts of books, yeah, it's going to be an expensive professional services engagement, in line with any other kind of auditing that needs to be done. It's really more offline work in the auditing than what happens on a blockchain and with software. So, yeah, happy to take any more questions, but thank you, everybody, for your interest in this as well.
Hey, Si, I have a question. So apart
Uh-huh.
from the coding side of things, I've seen you interact through Hyperledger. I've been a ton of calls with you, right? What has been your biggest challenge on trying to understand all this carbon emissions versus carbon offsetting versus counting, right? Because different people count different ways. What has been your biggest challenge?
I think the biggest thing is just how complex climate is, okay, and how many sides to the story there are. And so, you know, you have, it's something that affects all of us, and it's something that all of us contribute to, really, right? And so people who are thinking that this is simple, okay, let's just get the government to pass a law so that some industry will stop emitting, are forgetting that you probably use their products, your neighbors use their products, somebody you know is probably employed directly or indirectly by that industry. And really, in the end, it's not that simple. So then there's a path to decarbonization, to reaching net zero. And then there's there's different claims about these paths, okay? And so, for example, how quickly could sustainable aviation fuels or hydrogen be used to fuel airplanes? That's an unknown. So different industries will claim different things. And what is the real benefit of different types of offset projects? Are offset projects beneficial, or are they delaying the switch to these products over here that would actually reduce emissions? Where all these play, and each participant, justifiably so, have their own perspective that is in some ways valid and in some ways also beneficial to them. So the tough thing is to bring this all together, right? And that's what we're hoping the blockchain could do. That's the ultimate goal here. It's not just to make transactions easier or to create a cryptocurrency that people could speculate, but really, how do we get all these different opinions, points of views to transact in one marketplace, so that so that we reach some goal? And then that's really, really hard. And where do you start with that? Do you start with the big companies? Do you start with the standards organizations? Do you start with yourself? And for me, the last question I've wrestled with, I've tried different angles. And in the end, I'm thinking, look, open source has worked for me. I'm just going to start with myself. I took a flight over my emissions, and what could I really have done to reduce those emissions? And maybe we can start from there and move forward. So, yeah. So, who are the incumbents already doing this? For carbon accounting, you have a variety of companies doing this. Okay, all the ERP vendors are getting into this. Salesforce has a sustainability cloud. SAP has climate accounting modules for their software. And then there's the startups I mentioned earlier. But ultimately, remember, climate accounting calculation is not hard. It's basically ETL, right? You extract data from a database and you multiply and add. It's just a matter of summing up the data. But what's hard is getting the data through the supply chain. That's the problem that we're here to solve. So here's a good one. Okay, I think I should take this one. Vera is halting, blocking tokenization of retired carbon offsets. That is critical for the use of blockchain technology within the climate sector, right? No, it is not. And I'll tell you why it's not, first of all. And that is because voluntary carbon offsets is a tiny sector, okay? I think that you might not realize how small it is, but it's something like it offsets a day's worth of emissions every year. Okay, most of the emissions are in the supply chain. It's caused by things like transportation, it's caused by energy and airlines and just all the uses of basically products and industry. So first of all, whatever happens in the voluntary offset market at this point is not that important in the scheme of things, unfortunately. Okay. Second of all, again, not critical for the use of blockchain technology within climate, because what I'm talking about here, which is calculating supply chain emissions, has really nothing to do with offsets and carbon credits. Is basically helping companies to understand their emissions and then understanding how to reduce those emissions. Okay, and that is not just as simple as, hey, let's just go out there and buy a whole bunch of offsets. And I think what Vera did is what they needed to do. I mean, people were trying to do one-way synchronizations with their registry. Okay, so you need to, if you're going to transfer something between one system and another, everybody here knows, right? You need to have two-way synchronization. You need to make sure that the source reached the end and then the source knows that the message went through. So this is not a negative in any way, I see. So let's see. Yeah, if there's no other questions, then okay, let's see. How monetization happens through tokenization? Can carbon removal converted to tokens bought by a buyer use the case towards financing of its project? Yeah, it could. I mean, there's nothing magical about tokenization, right? In the end, you have to find buyers for your carbon removal project. So you can convert it to tokens, or you could sell it to a company that's looking through the current network, or even Gold Standard has a marketplace for doing that. So I'm not convinced that tokenization is the way to do it. So let's see. What is the biggest challenge? Yeah, the biggest challenge is finding people and companies eventually who are serious about climate change, who appreciate its complexity, and then understand that we need to work together and in a balanced way. I think there's a lot of people, I feel like there's a lot of people who care about climate, but they either want to make it very simple, and in that process really dumb it down to a point where it doesn't work anymore. Okay, like all these people that say, we're carbon neutral, we bought some offsets. Well, those offsets aren't real. And at least the ones that I often see people claim. And then there's cases where, no, you can't offset your way out of climate. And then there's also a lot of people who are just confrontational about climate. And that's not going to work either, because in the end, we're all in this together and we need to work together. So finding the right group to work with has been very difficult.
So that seems like a call to action for me, right? Folks on the call, I
absolutely.
know of anybody who's interested. I know that I'll be looking at your platform, Si. I'm taking a flight soon, so looking forward to finding out how that all works. But people, if you think of anything that would help Si out, that's why we're here, right? It's about community.
Yeah, and I understand, we're an open source project, but I'm not asking everybody to volunteer here. This is something that you can use for yourself, and this is also something that you can absolutely use and sell to your customers. I believe that, and that's what we're building for you. So yeah, any further questions or follow-up? There it is. There's my email. So thank you everybody really for your support.
I think he's satisfied the attendance fully, Si. That was a great talk. By the way, sorry for being late, but I had some troubles in joining today. So that was a great presentation.
Thank you.
So I think, Rick, what do you think we can call the meeting off and say we're going to go deeper into this. This was the first of hopefully many events to come, and I'll let Si, my friend Si, kick this off. We're going to be back in June with some more topics related to environment, sustainability, in line with what Eric and I were doing with the supply chain and trade fund, say, by the way, and those follow, I understand. So a good follow-up to our meeting on May the 12th. It proved to be quite successfully, and a good starting point for expanding the discussion. We're going to have another meeting on June the 16th, where we will discuss the environmental impact under a different perspective on the blockchain side of technology. So how technology, our third generation blockchain, can help reduce emissions and tackle climate change. So we will be hearing from my friend Bill Kanza into this, and I hope to see you soon all during that meeting. We're going to have more of these. We're going to focus on also on other related topics. So, I mean, on behalf of Blockchain Supply Chain Association, I thank you all for being with us today, and I thank Si for being with us, by the way, kicking this off.
Sure.
Hope to see you soon.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Reed.
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.